Hello, and welcome to this module, Christian Theology in Encounter with Other Faiths. I'm the tutor for this module. In this short video, I'll be giving a brief introduction to what the module aims to do, and then when we meet face-to-face over Zoom for our first session, we can develop the conversation further, as well as focus on a couple of particular issues. Now, of course, there are lots of religions in the world. There's not even a neat consensus amongst people who write in this area about what we mean by a religion. So it's not possible for us to consider every aspect of this fascinating topic or to explore every single religion. Instead, we will focus on two major religious traditions, Islam and Hinduism. Islam is one of the Abrahamic traditions, along with Judaism and Christianity, and Hinduism is an Eastern tradition, along with others, including Buddhism and Sikhism. So these two traditions give us a good sense of important aspects of religious diversity. It would be good to hear from you about your own experiences from other religions, other religions when we meet. But don't worry if you feel you have minimal experience, that's fine as well. And you may not be sure whether, say, Hinduism is relevant in your context, but for me it can be hugely significant to discover that there are other people out there in the world, even if they're not living next door to you, who believe such different things about reality, and who also may have particular thoughts, for instance, about Jesus, that he may be one revelation of God amongst many. That because there are people who believe these different things, it's worth engaging with these ideas and considering them. One theologian who writes in this area is David Ford, and he speaks about us leaving the house of our own tradition for a while and entering into the more fragile space of a tent where we may encounter people and ideas from other religions, those who have also left their own house to encounter us in the tent. And in this less secure meeting place of a fragile tent, we share insights in a vulnerable way, in a sense. And when we return to our own house, we have new questions, new ways of seeing things, which make us look at and think about our own house, our own tradition, slightly differently. This is the thing about interreligious encounter, doing theology interreligiously. It's not just about trying to understand another religion, though that is arguably important in itself, but it's about how we see ourselves too. After all, it turns out that Christians don't have all the same view about other religions. It's not just that there is a diversity outside of our house in how people have that conversation when they get into the tent. There's also significant diversity within the house. We tell our story in varied ways. We draw on our sources of authority using quite different approaches. We see the goal of our religion very differently. What I love about this field of theology is that it helps us to see connections between different aspects of theology, and that sometimes the connections are a bit messy and even unresolved. And that theology itself doesn't exist in a vacuum where we just do this thing called theology, but is affected by people's feelings, people's fears, people's and social history, the legacy of colonialism, and so much more. So we all come with baggage to the table, to the tent. We all come with experiences, prejudices, questions, instincts, politics, which help to explain why this religious world, and this interreligious world in particular, is so rich and complex. So it's important for us to note that the encounter between religions, or the dialogue as it's often called, can happen at different levels. The dialogue of life is concerned with the everyday practices that people engage in their religion. The dialogue of truth is about the pursuit for an understanding of what people's beliefs are, their worldview, how they actually think things through in their faith. The dialogue of religious experience is to do with the spirituality, the heart stuff, how people sort of feel it in their encounter with the transcendence. And the dialogue of action, dialoguing around potential areas for common purpose, common social goals, social justice, peace, reconciliation. So 4 sorts of levels that people dialogue around. And all of those are important, though this module can't address all of them, unfortunately, all of that complexity. So to bring it down to the specifics of this module for a moment, we tend to focus on the dialogue of truth, which often connects with and speaks to those other concerns, but we're particularly exploring what's going on theologically, how people tell the truth in their tradition and how they see truth differently from one another. And to do that, to see what's going on theologically for us as Christians, we need to understand what's going on theologically in another tradition in their own terms as much as possible. Not possible to do it entirely as they would see things because we're stepping into it as outsiders. So in a short course, we can never exactly immerse ourselves in a different theological ocean. We're just dipping our toes in a sense, engaging with some of the key ideas, aspects of their sacred texts, some of their debates, and how they view particular aspects of Christian theology, and then thinking how we can respond from our own perspectives. But it's not a new task which Christians have only recently been engaging with. Christian theology has always been doing this business of doing its theology through encounter with people in other traditions. We will think about this through a particular case study in the first session, the encounter between Christians and those around them in the very early days of the church. But by way of a brief illustration of the sorts of questions that get raised by this interreligious conversation, how about this question? How should we even talk about religions? As religions, or faiths, or what? The word religions has been used less in recent years, at a popular level at least. People have become more wary of the word. It has negative connotations. People often say they're spiritual and not religious. I'm sure some of you have heard that. Because of the institutional implications of the word religion, organised religion is something that people are a bit nervous about. So many prefer the term faiths. It sounds more friendly. We talk of interfaith dialogue, conversation between people in different faiths. But some people ask the question, is faiths the right word for what we're talking about? For a start, it very much comes out of a Christian belief system with its focus on faith. So it can seem a bit odd that people in other religions have adopted this word, to talk about their own tradition, the Muslim faith, the Hindu faith. It feels as though people are doing something like dancing to a Christian tune, as though in an interfaith context, people want to be seen to fit in with perhaps the predominance of Christianity. But there's another question about the term, prompted by St. Paul's contrast between faith and works. We're used to thinking of works as social action, good works, but biblical scholarship has focused more recently on another way of seeing this, that Paul, after all, gave the example of works, the example of circumcision, which isn't about good works. It is a thing that people do in order to distinguish themselves from those outside of themselves. It is a boundary marker. So we do this thing, the Jews would have said, we do this thing called circumcision in order to establish that we are not Gentiles. So it is a boundary marker. So Paul was saying that it is a delusion to think that we are saved by our works, by the things that we do that distinguish ourselves from others. And faith is not like that. Faith is not a boundary marker. That's interesting, isn't it? In fact, this idea of there being things that that separate us from one another is, in a sense, one of the things we need saving from. Because Paul would go on to say, in Christ there is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female. Christ is the one who breaks down the barriers between us. So faith has to do with overcoming barriers. So it shouldn't be seen as something that exists within a boundary. And it is faith or faithfulness, the Greek word can mean both, which saves us from such a mentality. Faith opens us up to those who are not part of our tribe. Faith transcends, whereas works close down. So it's very odd, if you think about it, to talk of different religions as faiths, implying there's one faith here and another faith there, because faith doesn't live in boxes. Instead, it transcends the boxes. It opens us up to those who are genuinely different, other neighbours, so that we can learn to love our neighbours, even enemies, so that we can love our enemies, enabling us to love and love again. Faith in Christ, or faithfulness to Christ, or the faithfulness of Christ, is about loyalty to this way of faith which breaks down barriers. So if all of that's true, and you might argue with it, but if that is true, is faith the right word to talk about different separated groups? A faith there, another faith there, many different faiths. There are certainly many different religions. There are real differences between them. Faith doesn't deny those differences, but it doesn't see them as the end of the story. In fact, faith opens us up to those who are other, the stranger, the neighbour, the other. But it's difficult to stop people using the word faiths to talk about the religions. I'm just highlighting a potential confusion here, because to talk of faiths while also talking of being saved by faith is to use the same word in two very different ways. Faith, 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 or being saved by faith, which opens us up across the boundaries. It's worth pondering that confusion. So you see, sorry if I rattled through that a little bit, it's just an illustration of one of the questions that is prompted by this whole area of interreligious encounter. But you see there that even a word used to describe religions is not straightforward. And the debate invites us to think about how we view our own religion. What is faith? What do we have faith in? How does it relate to other traditions and to what they do and say? And how do they think about this idea? Hopefully when we meet, you can respond to some of these ideas, some of these questions, and we can start to have a conversation with one another. And I look forward to sharing with you.